At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. Because, after all, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Johnny. Let's begin. The first mistake the Axiom ascendancy made was assuming a bad back meant weakness. In hindsight, the error was of such galactic stupidity that ascendancy scholastics would study it for centuries, a cautionary tale written in the blood of their most decorated soldiers, illustrating what happens when rigid doctrine collides with weaponized boredom. On a floating command dais suspended above the bewildered retirees of the Elysian Fields Senior Living Asteroid, Invasion Commander Crane, the Syllogist, was having a spectacular day. He surveyed the Central Plaza, now a meticulously organized containment zone, with the smug satisfaction of a logician who just proven a particularly simple, elegant theorem. His towering soldiers, their upper, heavy-muscled arms gripping plasma rifles while their lower, slender manipulators gestured citizens into neat lines, herded the dazed elderly. Everything proceeded according to the sacred syllogisms of conquest. He activated the dais's external audio emitters, his voice booming through the station's suddenly conquered public address system. The sound was a dry rasp, like sandpaper on bone, and it sent the small hairs on human necks to attention. "Biological assets of this habitat," he began, gesturing grandly with his two primary limbs. "You are now a subsidiary of the Axiom ascendancy. Resistance is a statistical anomaly we do not tolerate. Surrender is your only logical recourse." He paused for effect, letting the weight of his pronouncement settle. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the station's air scrubbers and the faint, rhythmic beeping of someone's pacemaker. "Our species outnumbers humanity 1,000 to 1. This serene habitat, this gilded cage, is the first trivial premise and the proof of your species' inevitable, orderly subjugation." Crane's gaze swept the crowd, his array of optical sensors, each a polished black lens, analyzing threat levels and compliance probabilities. His attention settled on a defiant-looking old man leaning heavily on a simple metal cane. The man's file, pulled from the station's public records, flashed in Crane's ocular implant. Pike, Sidious, Sergeant Major, retired. Perfect. An example was required to validate the initial hypothesis. "Our intelligence confirms this habitat has designated a Veteran Services Division," Crane boomed, a sneer synthesized in his vocalization. "How quaint. It is where you humans send your faded glories to rust, an incontrovertible data point proving your species' sentimental, inefficient decay." He pointed a clawed finger at Sid. "You, soldier, step forward and present this colony's formal surrender. Demonstrate to your lessers the wisdom of compliance." An Axiom guard, 8 feet of muscle and arrogance, moved toward Sid. At that exact moment, a familiar, agonizing twinge shot up Sid's spine. A disc that had been complaining since the second Brachyon scouring decided this was the perfect moment for a full-throated protest. He grimaced, his face contorting in genuine, unadulterated pain. The soldier saw the grimace and interpreted it through the lens of Axiom doctrine. Fear. It puffed out its chest, its movements slowing to a predatory saunter. Sidious Pike looked up from under a furrowed gray brow, his pale blue eyes locking onto the soldier, then flicking up to Crane on his dais. A slow, dangerous smirk spread across his face, a cracked desert floor of a smile. "You fellas ever hear of the siege at the Maw of Lyra?" Sid's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, yet it carried across the plaza. "No? Well, Class is in session, knuckleheads. He dropped the cane. It didn't clatter. The top half, the part he'd been gripping, stayed in his hand. The bottom half fell away to reveal the twin muzzles of a custom-built sawed-off shotgun, its stock seamlessly integrated into the handle. In a single fluid motion that defied every aching joint in his body, he raised the weapon. It aimed above the soldier in front of him. It aimed at the dais. He squeezed the trigger. The sound was a flat, sharp crack, a report far too contained for a shotgun's roar. A single hypervelocity fléchette slug screamed across the plaza. It struck Crane's second-in-command in the chest. The alien's composite armor vaporized in a flash of light, and the sub-commander ceased to exist from the sternum up, his top half disintegrating into a spray of violet gore and superheated metal. For a single, beautiful heartbeat, there was only shock. The Axiom soldiers froze, their tactical doctrine containing no flowchart for commander's second-in-command spontaneously becomes a fine mist. Then, Sid's voice roared out, a parade ground bark that had straightened the spines of generations of recruits. "Scatter and rally at the grog! Code Ragnarok!" Alarms blared. Plasma fire stitched across a nearby bulkhead, followed by the shriek of tearing metal. A crewman screamed as the plaza's ambient lighting went out, plunging the entire area into the pulsing red of emergency strobes. Chaos was too disorganized a word for the response that swept through the Elysian Fields Plaza. The reaction was something far more terrifying. The instantaneous activation of 100 different contingency plans, all conceived in the crucible of profound boredom and honed by lifetimes of experience. The Axiom, trained for the orderly suppression of panicked civilians, were utterly unprepared for a coordinated, violent, and deeply sarcastic response from what they thought were docile sheep. An old woman with a walker that looked suspiciously over-engineered slammed a button on its handle. The walker's legs telescoped outward, locking into a low-slung, mobile barricade as she produced a heavy-caliber pistol from her knitting bag and laid down brutally accurate covering fire.
"Get to cover, you lumbering apes!"
she shrieked, her voice thin but furious.
"My petunias are not going to water themselves."
A man in a worn pilot's jacket, who hadn't flown anything faster than a mobility scooter in 20 years, shouted in clipped, concise jargon. "Hostiles on the 9, 3 o'clock and 6. Taking fire from elevated position. Mark that dais as primary." His muscle memory screamed louder than his arthritis. The Axiom fumbled, their textbook arrangements breaking as their targets refused to behave like targets. They expected cowering. They got flanking maneuvers executed with plasteel park benches. They expected screams of terror. They got grizzled war cries and complaints about the drafty conditions. Sid, meanwhile, moved with a limping purpose, his eyes fixed on his objective, ignoring the plasma fire. He racked another shell into his shotgun. He called her the Negotiator, and blew the leg off an Axiom guard trying to bring its plasma rifle to bear. The alien toppled with a screech, its comrades turning in confusion. That was all the opening he needed. He ducked behind a large decorative planter, the station's prize-winning zinnias, providing surprisingly effective concealment. The rally point was the Zero-G Grog, the station's only bar and the unofficial headquarters for every bad idea conceived on Elysian Fields for the last 30 years. As retirees, moving with the surprising speed of the chronically underestimated, converged on its location, the first coordinated defense formed. They were a fighting retreat. Sid was one of the last to arrive, sliding through the reinforced doorway just as Audra Spitfire Novak, a woman with wild white hair and a terrifyingly cheerful grin, prepared to seal it.
"Took you long enough, slowpoke,"
Audra chirped, her hands moving with a swift purpose over the door's control panel.
"I was about to start the fun without you."
"My back went out," Sid grumbled, leaning against the wall and reloading. "And stop calling it fun. This is a tactical crisis."
"For me, it can be two things at once."
Her laughter was a series of sharp, excited barks. She slammed a final override switch. The heavy blast door slid shut with a definitive house-sized thump, followed moments later by the impotent hiss of plasma bolts striking its outer surface. They were in the bar's basement, a fortified space that also served as Audra's unofficial workshop and the colony's unofficial armory. Esme Wraith Dubois was already there, sitting calmly in a comfortable armchair, a thin data filament cable jacked into a port behind her ear. She looked like a sweet old grandmother, right up until you saw the predatory stillness in her eyes. "They're confused," Esme said, her voice a soothing murmur that was completely at odds with the situation. "Their command structure is screaming about doctrinal deviations. It's lovely." Sid grunted, checking the action on his shotgun. "You know, I told the housing committee putting all of us psychos in one beautiful, strategically vital basket was either the smartest or the stupidest idea in military history." He looked around the basement at the racks of hoarded equipment and the faces of his friends. "And that gold Ragnarok contingency was a retirement hobby that went way too far."
Looks like it's both, Sid. Isn't it wonderful?
Audra clapped him on the back, making him wince.
Now, about that emergency beacon. Already sent, dearie,
Esme said without opening her eyes.
High priority encrypted data burst. Direct to every known family and military contact in the sector. My granddaughter's fleet is on maneuvers nearby. They'll get it.
She smiled faintly.
But they're hours away, maybe a day. Plenty of time for us to make a proper first impression.
The generational compact. It was a promise, not a cry for help. It was the old guard telling the new guard, we're holding the line. Come and see the mess we make. Audra's eyes, magnified by a pair of ridiculously powerful spectacles, gleamed as she pointed a wrench at the bar's massive, industrial-grade food synthesizer, a hulking stainless steel monstrosity.
That baby,
she said with the reverence of a true artist,
works by breaking down carbon blocks into a fine nutrient aerosol. A few bypassed safety limiters, a little rerouting of the dispersal system. I just need to rig it to vent its entire reserve of highly flammable carbon dust, and then, a little spark.
Her grin was all teeth.
Give me an hour, Sid, and it's a thermobaric bomb powerful enough to turn the Central Plaza into a new, sunnier atrium.
Esme's faint smile widened.
And while she's cooking, I'll be setting the table. I can get into their fleet's battle network from here. Their firewalls are too robust. For the station's internal systems, the ones they just took over.
She chuckled, a sound like rustling silk.
Oh, dearie, I can make their lives very, very annoying.
Sid looked from the mad engineer to the ghost of the machine, and then to the handful of other veterans who made it to the grog. He felt the familiar, weary weight of command settle on his shoulders. All right, he sighed. Let's get to work. Time to show these kids why we're the generation that invented the zip tie. The transformation of Elysian Fields from a retirement community into a fortress happened with the terrifying speed of a project planned for years out of sheer, weaponized old age. No one panicked. They moved with a grim, gleeful sense of purpose. For them, this was the ultimate retirement activity. In the station's maintenance bay, Audra Novak was in her element, a manic conductor orchestrating a symphony of mayhem.
Forget safety limiters,
she yelled over the screech of a plasma cutter.
They're just suggestions from people who never had to weaponize a hydroponics pump by mid-shift.
She directed a team of old engineers, men and women whose hands might tremble slightly, but whose knowledge of machinery was deeply, almost religiously ingrained. Their target? A fleet of medical exoskeletons designed to help residents with mobility issues. Within minutes, they were converted into crude but brutally effective power armor. Scrap plating from damaged service carts was welded onto limbs. Hydraulic strength assisters were hot-wired, bypassing the gentle settings designed for physical therapy and cranking them up to crush an Axiom skull in one go.
More power!
Audra shrieked, her face lit by a shower of sparks.
If it doesn't threaten to rip your own arms off, it's not strong enough.
Elsewhere, in a quiet corner of the station's cargo bay, a retired quartermaster named Sal pried open a large container marked Archived Recreational Equipment. Inside, nestled in perfectly maintained vacuum-sealed bags, lay a cache of antique but immaculate pulse rifles from the Martian Rebellion, weapons known for their reliability, stopping power, and a recoil that could dislocate a young recruit's shoulder.
They called them obsolete,
Sal muttered to himself, lovingly running a cloth over a rifle's stock.
Said the new plasma casters were more effective. Well, let's see how effective they are when old Betsy here punches a hole clean through their engine block.
He handed them out to a line of eager-looking retirees.
Watch your shoulder,
Sal warned one man, slapping the rifle's stock.
This one's got a kick that'll rattle your dentures, but it'll punch through anything those multi-limbed freaks are wearing.
The most terrifying transformation, however, happened in the station's sprawling hydroponics garden. The Elysian Fields Gardening Club, a group of 5 sweet-faced old women led by a terrifyingly cheerful matriarch named Maria, had gathered their tools.
Now, remember, ladies,
Maria said, adjusting her sun hat as she addressed her group, who were busy modifying industrial fertilizer sprayers.
This hydroponic growth accelerant, PX7, is a highly corrosive organophosphate, banned in 3 systems for a reason.
She held up a canister of the vicious green liquid.
It's wonderful for encouraging rapid root growth in Martian space leaks, but it does have a tendency to dissolve most forms of composite armor on contact.
A woman named Beatrice piped up.
Does that mean we should dilute it, Maria?
Maria gave her a withering look.
Don't be silly, Beatrice. This isn't the annual Xenia Festival.
The preparation became a beautiful, chaotic display of defiance. Retired demolition experts turned fire suppression systems into concussion charges. The station's chief shuttle pilot, a man who now used a souped-up mobility scooter to get around, was in the Grog's simulator, refamiliarizing himself with the controls of an Axiom dropship, just in case. And through it all, Esme sat in her chair, the calm eye of the hurricane. Her consciousness was a silent, deadly predator slithering through the station's network. She bypassed Axiom security measures with contemptuous ease, planting digital time bombs and logic traps. She prepared for the fight by composing an opera of pure, unadulterated psychological warfare, and the overture was about to begin. Her expression was serene, a stark contrast to the digital chaos she was lining up, ready to unleash at the flick of a mental switch. Esme's first move was a sound. Suddenly, every public address speaker on the station screamed to life. From the plaza to the service corridors, it was AC/DC's Thunderstruck, blasting at a physically painful volume that vibrated through the station's deck plating. On the command dais, Crane tried to restore order.
All units, report! From containment perimeters, execute compliance procedure Gamma!
His voice was obliterated by Angus Young's screaming guitar. Simultaneously, Esme launched her second attack. She didn't try to breach their encrypted comms. She simply flooded them. A massive brute force denial-of-service attack hit their network, turning their orderly channels into a wall of shrieking digital static. To the Axiom, it was as if the universe had started screaming directly into their skulls. They staggered, clutching their helmets, their greatest strength, their coordination, rendered utterly useless. Then, messages appeared. On every hijacked Axiom display, from the massive schematics on the dais to the tiny heads-up displays in individual soldiers' helmets, words flashed in stark, blocky letters. Welcome to hell. Population, us. Your quarterly performance review is in. It's not good. Have you tried turning your invasion off and on again? Another message appeared, a direct private communication to Crane's personal datapad. It was a simple looping video of a cat playing a piano. Underneath, a single line of text. We are very disappointed in you. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the counterattack was more disorienting than any conventional weapon. It was a declaration that the defenders were not just fighting back, they were actively mocking them. They weren't afraid, they were having fun. For a culture built on rigid order and humorless conquest, this was a doctrinal impossibility. It was like being savaged by a pack of laughing hyenas. The view from Imperator Crane's command dais was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. His tactical projection, once a clean and orderly display, was now a flickering nightmare of error messages and nonsensical alerts. Doctrine violation, unconventional tactics detected. Warning, non-standard weaponry deployed. Classification, repurposed furniture. Communications integrity, 4%. Primary audio channel compromised by deafening static. Crane stared at the screen. For a full 3 seconds, his mind, a machine of pure Axiom doctrine, simply refused to process the input. The symbols reported geriatric non-combatants executing a perfect pincer movement using repurposed cafe tables. The logic was flawed. The data defied all logic. The universe had developed a syntax error. Then the cognitive dissonance shattered, and in its place came a pure, cleansing rage. "Sir!" an underling shrieked over the deafening music, his voice cracking with panic. He pointed a trembling four-fingered hand toward the edge of the plaza, where one of his squads was in full retreat from a sliding plasteel dining table. "Sir, they're using dinnerware as mobile cover." This was impossible. His soldiers were the elite of the Ascendancy, forged in 100 victorious campaigns. The flaw could not be in the plan. The plan was perfect, derived from centuries of doctrinal purity. Therefore, the flaw had to be in the tools. "You are relieved of command, Captain," Crane bellowed at the panicking officer. "Your fear is contaminating the unit. Send in the 3rd Phalanx. I want them to level that sector." He was convinced his troops were hallucinating, cracking under the pressure of a simple pacification mission. This was not a sign of capable enemy, but proof of his own subordinates' incompetence. He would purge them all if he had to. The decision rippled through his command structure. The soldiers on the ground, already disoriented, now had a new fear to contend with, the unhinged rage of their own commander. For the first time in their careers, the enemy in front of them seemed marginally less terrifying than the leader behind them. Sidious Pike knew guerrilla warfare like he knew the ache in his lower back. It was an old, intimate, and deeply unpleasant friend. He led a team of 5 on a classic lure and trap maneuver. Their target, a heavily armed Axiom patrol that was systematically clearing the station's commercial sector. "This way, troopers," Sid hissed, waving them into the humid, verdant expanse of the multi-level hydroponics bay. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and chlorophyll. Rows of tomato vines, genetically engineered for 0G, hung like green curtains, providing perfect concealment. They moved quickly, their soft-soled shoes making little noise on the grated floor. The Axiom patrol followed, their heavy armored boots clanging with oblivious confidence. They saw the bay as empty space on a map, not as the killing ground it was about to become. Sid positioned himself behind a large irrigation tank, his shotgun held at a low ready. His team melted into the foliage, weapons aimed at the predetermined ambush point. He watched the aliens advance, their movements predictable, their arrangement a perfect textbook diamond. They walked right into the grinder. He was about to give the signal, a soft click on his personal comm. He shifted his weight, putting pressure on his left leg. Crack! The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet bay. Not a twig, but his own damn knee. A bolt of white-hot agony shot up his leg, and his vision swam. He stumbled, catching himself on a trellis of tomato vines and tumbling gracelessly to the ground with a muffled curse. The Axiom squad leader, a brute with a heavy plasma repeater, froze. His helmeted head swiveled, its optical sensors zeroing in on the rustling vines. He barked an order in his guttural language and advanced, his squad bunching up behind him for fire support. The situation devolved into a disaster. Sid was exposed. The element of surprise was gone. But the momentary delay, the seconds it took the alien to pinpoint his location, had an unintended, beautiful consequence. The squad had bunched up perfectly, right in the center of the kill zone. Grimacing through the fire in his knee, Sid propped himself up on one elbow and thumbed the detonator in his hand. "Smile, you sons of bitches," he muttered. He hadn't triggered a bomb. He'd triggered the bay's industrial sprinkler system. But it wasn't water that rained down on the Axiom patrol. It was a thick, viscous shower of PX7, the gardening club's prize-winning, armor-dissolving growth accelerant. The aliens screeched as the corrosive fluid ate through their armor, sizzling and smoking on contact. Before they could react or even scream a second time, Sid hit the second trigger, the emergency flash freezing system, designed to halt runaway fungal infections, kicked in. Cryogenic mist billowed from hidden vents, and the temperature in the bay plummeted by 200 degrees in 3 seconds. The patrol was frozen solid in an instant, encased in a brittle, acid-etched shell of ice. They were statues of agony, their final moments of horror preserved for posterity. Sid pushed himself up, his knee protesting with every movement. He limped over to the frozen squad leader. He raised his shotgun and tapped the icy figure gently on the helmet. The statue shattered into 1,000 glittering violet-tinged pieces. "Should have worn a sweater," Sid grumbled, and hobbled off to find some painkillers. The main entrance to the Zero-G grog had become the focal point of the Axiom assault. It was a brutal, close-quarters firefight down a long metallic corridor. Plasma bolts seared the air, leaving molten scars on the walls. Audra Novak, cursing a blue streak, frantically tried to hotwire the heavy blast door's secondary locking mechanism. If she could get it sealed, they could fortify the position and force the aliens to find another, more difficult way in.
Almost got it,
she muttered, squinting through her thick glasses at the tiny, ridiculously complex circuitry inside the control panel. Her fingers, stained with grease and smelling faintly of burnt ceramic, wove through the wires. A plasma bolt screamed past her head, so close she felt the heat of it, and slammed into the wall behind her. She flinched violently, a purely involuntary reaction. Her high-tech reading glasses, perched precariously on the end of her nose, flew off her face. They hit the deck and skittered away into the dimly lit chaos of the corridor.
"Damn it!"
she shrieked, her voice a mix of fury and genuine panic.
"My glasses! I can't see a thing!"
The intricate web of wires in the panel instantly dissolved into a blurry, incomprehensible mess. She was effectively blind for any fine detail work. "Audra, now is not the time to go blind on me," Sid yelled, laying down a storm of covering fire with the captured plasma rifle. The alien weapon was heavy and awkward, but it packed a hell of a punch. Another volley of enemy fire forced him back behind the edge of the doorway.
"I can't help it, you old goat,"
she yelled back, her voice tight with frustration.
"They're out there somewhere."
Sid risked a glance around the corner. An Axiom heavy, a walking tank of an alien, advanced down the hall, laying down suppressing fire. They had seconds. Thinking fast, Sid grabbed the fallen Axiom's rifle, not to fire it, but for its powerful built-in flashlight. He leaned out just far enough to sweep the beam across the floor near Audra. "Look for the glint! Spitfire, now!" Audra scrambled onto her hands and knees, patting the grimy floor frantically like a woman searching for a lost contact lens in a hurricane. The flashlight beam danced across the ground, and for a second, she saw it, a tiny sparkle of light reflecting off a lens. She lunged, her fingers closing around the familiar frame. She shoved them back on her face, the world snapping back into a sharp, terrifying focus. The Axiom Heavy was 10 feet away and raising its weapon for a final, door-destroying shot. Audra's fingers found the right wires by pure instinct. She twisted them together, and a shower of sparks erupted from the panel. With a deep groan of tortured metal, the blast door slammed shut. It closed with perfect, gruesome timing, cutting the advancing Axiom clean in half. Its top fell forward with a wet metallic clank, while its legs stood for a second longer before toppling backward. Audra leaned against the now-sealed door, her chest heaving, her heart hammering against her ribs. She took a deep breath, adjusted her glasses, and gave Sid a shaky grin.
"See?"
she said, her voice a little too high.
"No problem."
Having secured the grog, Audra moved to reinforce the engineering sector, the heart of the station's power and life support. She arrived just in time to find an Axiom heavy weapons squad trying to blast their way through the main entrance. They were setting up a portable breaching charge. This time, Audra wasn't just a technician. She was a walking instrument of destruction. She was clad in one of her custom-modified medical exoskeletons, a sparking, oversized monstrosity of welded plates and bypassed hydraulics that whined and hissed with every step. Cradled in its powerful arms was her masterpiece, the nutrient paste synthesizer from the bar, now hissing and vibrating ominously. The Axiom squad turned as she stomped into the corridor. They saw the patchwork armor, the wild-haired old woman inside it, and the repurposed kitchen appliance. One of them actually made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Audra grinned back, a wide, manic slash of a smile that did not reach her eyes.
"You know,"
she chirped, her voice echoing slightly in the middle hallway,
"this thing works by breaking down carbon blocks into a fine nutrient aerosol."
She hefted the synthesizer, its weight no problem for the supercharged exoskeleton.
"I just rigged it to vent its entire reserve of highly flammable carbon dust and then, add a little spark."
With a roar of effort and a whoop of sheer, unholy joy, she heaved the device into their ranks. It tumbled end over end, landing with a heavy thud in the middle of the squad. They stared at it for a fraction of a second, their laughter dying in their throats. Audra slammed a control on her wrist, and the exoskeleton's legs propelled her backward in a powerful leap, sending her flying into the relative safety of a side passage. The explosion was a deafening whoomp that sucked the air out of the corridor before blowing it outward in a wave of fire. The blast vaporized the Axiom squad and tore a 20-foot hole in the station's outer hull, venting debris and fire into the cold vacuum of space. The sudden decompression was violent. Audra was slammed against the far wall of her side passage by the rushing wind. The last thing she saw before the atmosphere tried to drag her into the black was a massive emergency blast door slamming down from the ceiling just feet from the breach. It sealed the ruptured corridor with a ground-shaking boom, plunging her section into the stark red glow of emergency lighting. She picked herself up, gasping in the thin air, her ears ringing.
"A little more kick than I expected,"
she mused to herself.
"Note to self, reduce the aerosol concentration for the next one."
Jet Hawkins had been an ace fighter pilot during the Scourge incursion. He'd flown single-wing interceptors through asteroid fields at speeds that defied physics and racked up more confirmed kills than anyone in his squadron. Now, his knees were shot, his hands shook, and he got around on a souped-up mobility scooter he'd painted silver and christened the Gray Ghost. But his eyes were as sharp as ever. From his vantage point on a high service gantry, he saw an Axiom dropship descending for a landing in Hangar Bay 4. It deployed reinforcements, disgorging another platoon of heavily armed soldiers onto the deck. "Oh, you should not have parked there," Jet muttered, a predatory glint in his eye. This was an opportunity too beautiful to ignore. He gunned the scooter's electric motor, which whined in protest as it accelerated far beyond its factory specifications. He keyed his comm. Esme, you seeing this? Hangar 4. Get ready for a gift. With a hail of covering fire from other retirees positioned around the hangar, Jet went on the attack. The gray ghost zipped across the battlefield, a silver blur weaving between crates and panicked Axiom. He was a force of nature, a geriatric ghost on a chariot of fury. Plasma bolts sizzled around him, but he moved with the instinct of a pilot who had dodged far deadlier things. He zipped up the dropship's still-open ramp just as the last Axiom soldier was disembarking. He skidded to a halt in the cargo bay, leaping off the scooter and scrambling for the cockpit. The alien pilots looked up in surprise, only to be met with a face full of pepper spray from a canister Jet had liberated from the station's security office. He shoved the sputtering pilots out of their chairs and slammed himself into the command seat. The controls were alien, the layout baffling, but a cockpit was a cockpit. "Esme, it's all yours," he yelled into his comm, his hands hovering over the controls. "I'm in, with this thing speaking gibberish. Get me flying." In her fortified basement bunker, Esme's calm demeanor was a facade. Underneath, her mind was a raging inferno of processing power. Jet's voice came through a connection, and a thin, wolfish smile touched her lips. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for.
I see it, Jet. Keep it powered, dearie. That ship is my golden ticket. It's a live node on their paddle net.
Her consciousness, which had been gently prodding the edges of the Axiom fleet's network, now had a direct, hard-line entry point. She dove in.
Their network architecture,
she murmured, her physical body still perfectly still while her mind raced.
It's all top-down. No internal firewalls between their own ships. They never planned for someone getting on the inside. Arrogant fools.
She found what she was looking for, a deep system universal compatibility procedure. It was a dusty, forgotten piece of code, a galactic salvage standard included in almost all ship designs to allow for emergency control by other species. The Axiom, in their hubris, had probably forgotten it was even there.
I'm activating it now, Jet, she transmitted. It'll be clunky. The controls will feel like you're trying to fly a brick through molasses, but it should respond to your thoughts.
As Jet felt the ship's systems grudgingly begin to respond, Esme went to work. She ignored the temptation to simply crash their systems. That was vandalism. She operated as a thief, not a wrecker. She dove deep, targeting specific, high-value data, real-time fleet positions, shield modulation frequencies for every ship in their armada, power conduit schematics for Crane's command vessel, and, most importantly, their fleet-wide encrypted communication keys. She wasn't stealing their library. She was stealing the keys to their kingdom, copying every last one before slipping back out, a digital ghost leaving no trace of her passage. The payload was compiled, encrypted, and ready to be sent. All she needed was a recipient. Jet Hawkins let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated glee as the Axiom dropship lifted off the deck. Esme wasn't kidding. The controls fought him every step of the way. The ship lurched and swayed like a drunken whale, its stabilization thrusters firing in panicked, unsynchronized bursts. It was the ugliest piece of flying he'd ever performed, and it was the most fun he'd had in 30 years. He wasn't just flying the ship. He was wrestling it into submission, forcing his will upon it through the clunky, jury-rigged interface Esme had provided. Every sloppy, brutal maneuver was a testament to his raw, ingrained skill. On the hangar deck below, the Axiom ground forces stared up in utter confusion. One of their own ships was rising into the air, behaving like it was being piloted by a madman. Their confusion turned to terror as the ship's powerful, chin-mounted plasma cannons swiveled down to face them. "Showtime!" Jet yelled, mashing the firing stud. Beams of incandescent energy tore into the Axiom positions. Reinforcements that had been forming up for a new assault were annihilated. Cover was obliterated. The neat, orderly lines of the Axiom attack shattered into a panicked every alien for themselves retreat. Jet finally set the lurching dropship back down in the hangar bay, its landing struts groaning in protest. He slumped in the pilot's seat, his hands shaking uncontrollably from the adrenaline dump. He flexed his fingers, which were stiff and aching. "Gonna feel that in the morning," he wheezed to himself. "And the afternoon, and probably next week." In the brief, terrifying calm that followed, the lull in the fighting was more unnerving than the battle itself. The retirees had pushed the Axiom back, but the station was a wreck. Corridors were breached till the black fires burned in a dozen sectors, and they were taking losses. More importantly, they were running dangerously low on improvised ammunition and functioning exoskeletons. They had won the first round, but they were exhausted, and they knew the enemy would be back, this time with a better understanding of what they were facing. Sid stood on a makeshift command post overlooking the battered plaza, his shotgun leaning against the barricade. He took a swig of lukewarm water from a canteen and surveyed the damage. They'd done the impossible. They'd made a galactic empire bleed. But it wasn't enough. They couldn't hold out forever. Just as the cold reality of their situation began to settle in, Esme's voice came over his private comm, calm as ever, but with an undercurrent of something he hadn't heard all day. Excitement. "Sid," she said. "It's Tegan. She's close." Sid's heart, a tired old muscle, gave a powerful thump. He snatched the comm unit from his belt and thumbed the transmit button. "Tegan? Tegan, can you hear me?" Static crackled for a moment. Then it cleared, replaced by a young woman's voice, crisp and professional, yet achingly familiar. "Grandpa, I hear you. We were on maneuvers in the adjacent sector when your emergency signal blew up my console, lit a fire under some very comfortable chairs." There was a pause, and he could hear the faint sound of orders being given in the background. "Rallied every friendly ship with a pulse cannon and a grudge within a few light hours. Our ETA is 2 minutes. Try not to have all the fun without us." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his good knee washed over him. He looked out at the stars, visible through a massive hole in the plaza's canopy, searching. He felt the surge of warmth against the cold dread, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Before Sid could even think of a suitably grumpy and appreciative response, the universe outside Elysian Fields decided to rip itself a new one. Space, which had been a placid black dotted with the distant red glow of the Velos giant, twisted. A series of brilliant, violent flashes of light erupted as a dozen exit points from hyperspace tore open simultaneously. Out of them poured a motley, glorious, and utterly terrifying fleet of human ships. It wasn't just the sleek, gray frigates of the human systems navy, led by the HSN Gettysburg, Tegan's command. It was a chaotic assortment of humanity's finest. A massive, ugly-as-sin bulk freighter, its hull scarred and pitted from decades of asteroid hauling, simply plowed through an unsuspecting Axiom frigate, using its sheer, ungodly mass as a kinetic weapon. The alien ship crumpled like a tin can. The very deck beneath Sid's feet began to groan and vibrate, not from impacts, but from the sheer violence of the battle raging just outside. Flashes of weapons fire, blue and gold and angry crimson, strobed through the holes in the plaza's canopy, painting the scene in shifting apocalyptic light. The human's fleet comm channel, which Esme immediately patched through to Sid's unit, exploded into a cacophony of glorious, familial chaos. "Uncle Bruno, kinetic ramming is not a recognized fleet maneuver." A booming, cheerful voice shot back from the freighter, the Big Dipper. "Works for hauling asteroids, works for them. Now, we're the little jellyfish ones. I'm starving over here." Another voice, this one from a sleek corporate courier ship that now had missile pods welded to its fuselage, chimed in. "Tegan, honey, it's your Aunt Martha. Do try to leave some of the big ones for me, dear. My new plasma torpedoes need a proper field test." "All ships, form up on me. Target their command vessel. Fire on my mark." The Axiom fleet, which had been orbiting arrogantly, confident that their ground troops would soon secure the station, was caught completely flat-footed. They were being swarmed by a hornet's nest of angry relatives, hungry freighter captains, and board corporate security details, all led by a furiously competent Navy captain who was trying to command a battle and manage a family reunion from hell at the same time. On the ground, Sid felt a surge of adrenaline that washed away the pain and exhaustion. He grabbed his shotgun and turned to the weary defenders gathered around him. "You hear that, troops?" he roared, a wide, fierce grin splitting his face. "That's the cavalry, and they're saving us a dance. Let's give the bastards on the ground a proper send-off." A ragged but powerful cheer went up. The retirees rallied for one last glorious push. They surged out from their defensive positions, firing everything they had at the stunned Axiom soldiers, who were now trying to scramble back to their landing craft, their orderly invasion having devolved into a panicked rout. In orbit, Tegan's voice was cold steel.
"They're running back to their ships. They think they're safe. They think this is over."
She took a sharp breath.
"Esme, now!"
From her terminal deep inside the grog, Esme smiled.
"Been waiting for this, dearie,"
she whispered, and with a single mental command, she transmitted her payload.
"Here's everything they don't want you to know. Enjoy."
The data packet, shield frequencies, power grid schematics, targeting solutions, flashed across the human fleet. Targeting computers that had been struggling to lock onto the alien ships suddenly found their marks with unerring accuracy. It was no longer a battle. It was a systematic execution. The HSN Gettysburg's main gun fired, a lance of pure energy that bypassed the Axiom command ship's shields as if they weren't there, and slagged its primary reactor. Uncle Bruno's freighter unleashed a volley of repurposed mining charges that cracked a cruiser in half. On Martha's plasma torpedoes, it turned out, worked beautifully. On Crane's bridge, alarms screamed a symphony of death. Red lights flashed across the faces of his terrified crew.
"Their targeting is perfect,"
his tactical officer shrieked, his voice filled with disbelief.
"How can they know? They know where to hit us before we even reinforce the shields."
Crane stared at the tactical display, at the image of the human fleet tearing his armada to shreds, each shot striking a pre-identified weakness. Then his gaze drifted to the small, insignificant icon representing the retirement station, and the realization, cold and absolute, finally hit him. The Veteran Services Division. The obsolete biological assets. The faded glories sent to rust. His last whispered words, as the plasma from the Gettysburg's final volley consumed his bridge, were, "They were supposed to be obsolete." The space above Elysian Fields fell silent, a graveyard of shattered hulls and drifting debris. The victorious human ships, battered but triumphant, moved in to dock. The battle was over. Commander Tegan Pike was the first one through the airlock into Hangar 4, her Navy uniform immaculate despite the chaos. She ran across the deck, her professional composure cracking as she saw her grandfather leaning against the hull of a stolen Axiom dropship, looking 100 years old and dangerous as a cornered wolf. She threw her arms around him, a hug that was fierce with terror and relief.
"Grandpa, are you okay?"
she asked, pulling back to look at his bruised face and the smoking pulse rifle in his hand. Sid clapped her on the shoulder, wincing as his bad back protested the sudden movement. "Never better, kid. Just a bit stiff." He looked past her, a sly grin on his face. Don't tell me you were in such a hurry you forgot to listen to your old grandpa. Did you bring it?" Tegan rolled her eyes, but a genuine smile broke through.
"Of course I did."
She held up a heavily insulated case.
"A bottle of 200-year-old Aldebaran whiskey, just like you asked for your birthday."
"Birthday?" Sid grunted. "Kid, after a day like this, every day's a birthday. Let's go home. Some of this is for the living, and some of it's for the people who didn't make it to the party." The zero-G grog was scarred, battered, and had a new, unplanned skylight. But it was still standing. More importantly, It was packed to the rafters with celebrating retirees and their equally rowdy descendants. The air was a thick cocktail of smells, the sharp metallic tang of cordite overlaying the rich scent of spilled Aldebaran whiskey and cheap beer. The deck vibrated with the bass from a speaker blasting some ancient, energetic human rock music. It was loud, chaotic, and perfect. Before the main celebration truly began, Sid, standing on a slightly wobbly table, got everyone's attention. He held up his glass of precious whiskey. "To the empty chairs," he said, his voice quiet but carrying through the suddenly hushed room. "To Sal in the cargo bay. To Maria and her gardeners. To the sawbones who held the shuffleboard court with a busted rivet gun and a bad attitude." The room was silent for a single, profound heartbeat, a shared moment of solemn memory and fierce, unyielding respect for the fallen. The silence was shattered by Uncle Bruno, who was already deep in his cups and had his arm around a blushing Navy engineer. He raised his own bottle, a cheap terrestrial beer, not fine whiskey. "They went out loud," he bellowed. The whole bar erupted in a deafening, cathartic cheer. The party exploded back to life. Audra, now gloriously drunk and wearing her sparking exoskeleton like a party dress, was showing a group of wide-eyed Marines her schematics for weaponizing a dishwasher.
"The key is to bypass the rinse cycle and superheat the water into weaponized steam, see?"
Jet was arm-wrestling Uncle Bruno and, to everyone's astonishment, was winning. Esme sat quietly in her favorite armchair, surrounded by her grandchildren, a small, contented smile on her face as she sipped a cup of tea. At the bar, Sid and Tegan shared a glass of very fine whiskey. The smooth, smoky liquid was a balm on his aching soul. He raised his glass again, catching Tegan's eye. "To getting old," he toasted, his voice a low, satisfied rumble. "It's a terrible thing." He took a sip, then finished, a wicked twinkle in his eye. "But it's a hell of a lot more terrifying for the other guy." The entire bar, a multi-generational chorus of humanity at its most stubborn, defiant, and beautifully unhinged, roared in agreement.